We will start the event with some opening speeches from MEP Ivo Hristov, who is hosting today's event, as well as the Bulgarian Commissioner for Innovation, Research, Culture, Education and Youth. That's a long title, Maria Gabriel. After which we will have two panel discussions, first on the opportunities of 5G and secondly on the challenges. After each panel we shall also open up the floor for questions. So without further ado, I'd now like to invite MEP Ivo Hristov to give his opening statement.
Thank you. Уважаеми дами и господа, скъпи гости, уважаема госпожа Габриел, за мен е удоволствие да бъда домакин на днешната кръгла маса в Европейския парламент, посветена на предимствата и предизвикателствата при въвеждането на мрежите от трето поколение в Европейския съюз. Най-напред бих желал да поздравя българската делегация в залата, която специално гостува за събитието днес. Тя включва експерти по 5G, представители на университетската общност у нас, IT сектора, дигитални предприемачи и тех журналисти. Всеки един от тях познава и работи по темата от различен ъгъл и ще участва пряко или косвено в този процес. Благодарности на госпожа Габриела, която въпреки натоварения си график успя да уважи събитието. Вярвам, че всеки един от тук присъстващите би могъл да допринесе със своя опит и знания за обогатяването на днешната дискусия. Затова най-напред бих искал да ви благодаря, че се отзовахте на поканата да участвате в тази кръгла маса. Надявам се това да бъде базата на бъдещо сътрудничество по темата, която започва да навлиза и в българското публично пространство. Разгръщането на мобилните мрежи от трето поколение ще бъде в фокуса на работата на Комисията на Европейския парламент по промишленост, научни изследвания и енергетика, на която съм пълноправен член. 5G революцията, която ще промени из основи начина, по който живеем, работим и правим бизнес, вече е това. Тя е призвана да бъде гръбнакът на европейската дигитална икономика и двигател на иновациите. Новата технология има амбицията да промени из основи сектори като транспорта, енергетиката и здравеопазването. Това се възприема като естествена еволюция, тъй като светът, в който живеем, е все по-свързан. Същевременно Европа изостава в разгръщането и внедряването на 5G, а тази инфраструктура има потенциал да създаде стратегическо предимство и да направи икономиката на Съюза по-конкурентоспособна, от което бихме спечелили всички. Следвайки тази логика, през 2016 година Европейската комисия прие план за действие, който предвижда стартирането на 5G търговски услуги до 2020 година. В него е заложена целта покритието да обхване всички градски зони и основни пътни артерии до 2025 година. От лятото на тази година официално започнаха тестовете на мобилната мрежа от пето поколение и в България. Процесът изглежда необратим. Споменавам го и като проблем, защото за пореден път индустрията поставя в изкуствена засада всички други тревоги и съображения – здравни, екологични, етични и свързани с сигурността на данните. Именно необратимостта на процеса би следвало да ни накара да обърнем внимание и на предизвикателствата, които носят със себе си мобилните мрежи от пето поколение. Наред с многобройните предимства, вярвам, че трябва да обърнем сериозно внимание на възможните рискове, свързани с киберсигурността и потенциалните ефекти върху околната среда и човешкото здраве. Такава е и идеята на кръглата маса да отвори поле за дискусия относно ползите и предизвикателствата от внедряването на 5G мрежите, като разгледа темата от всички ъгли. Благодаря за вниманието.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hristov. I'd now like to introduce Bulgarian Commissioner Maria Gabriel.
Благодаря много, уважаеми господин Христов, уважаеми членове на Европейския парламент, дами и господа, скъпи участници в днешния форум. Позволете ми най-напред да започна с думи на благодарност. Благодарност и поздравления за организацията на днешната конференция на депутат Иво Hristov. За нас в Европейската комисия тази конференция е една от важните платформи за обмен на идеи, на мнения. За това ясно да поставим въпросите докъде сме стигнали, как сме се подготвили като Европа и Европейска комисия, но и все още какво ни предстои. Като за мен е много важно, че конференцията поставя много силен акцент върху това, което ние искаме да запазим като европейски с новите технологии. Тоест, те да бъдат в полза на хората, да вземат в предвид страховете им, негативните последици и реакциите, която бива преведена чрез конкретни политики, да е възможно най-близка до тях и най-адекватна до това, което те очакват от нас. Затова и за мен днес е важно да споделя няколко неща. Най-напред споделям виждането на Иво Hristov, че технологията от пето поколение е важна. Важно е не само да отбелязваме обаче нейната скорост, а по-скоро да се концентрираме върху нейните приложения. Имаме няколко много важни за всички европейски граждани области, от транспорта, през здравеопазването и стигнем до енергетиката. Нека не забравяме и мобилността. Истината е, че петото поколение може да ни даде много възможности. Той е в сърцевината на новата технологична революция, която преживяваме. Междувременно, също от толкова важно значение е да бъде навременно внедряването на технологиите, да бъдем много ясни, че те няма да бъдат навсякъде, а точно там, където има нужда. И по същия начин, паралелно през цялото време да отговаряме на въпросите, свързани с това как в обществото те намират приложение. Имаме една стартова точка. Трафикът на данни в мобилните мрежи нараства ежегодно поне с 50%. Нови приложения, като виртуална реалност, ще изискват още по-голям капацитет, още по-голяма скорост и още по-бързо време за реакция. Същевременно количеството данни се увеличава също по един много впечатляващ начин. Имаме нови технологии, като високоизчислителните производителни технологии, изкуствения интелект, интернет на нещата. Всичко това ще продължи да ни води към значително увеличение на обема от данни. За да може обаче да се подготвим за този етап, когато чрез технологии тези данни ще могат да ни служат, за мен беше важно и като Европейска комисия последните няколко години да имаме ключови инициативи. Един от ключовите резултати, той е в рамките на стратегията за цифрови единен пазар, това беше новия Европейски кодекс за електронни съобщения. Спомняте си, че по време на тези дълги месеци на преговори нееднократно казвах колко важно е да има координация между държавите членки по отношение на честотните спектри. Нека не повтаряме грешки, свързани с 3 и с 4G. Затова държавите членки беше много окуражителен знак, че се ангажираха да координират своите честоти до края на 2020 година, така че да позволят да запазим европейски подход по отношение на 5G. Мисля, че това е едно от нашите първи послания. Знаем, че няма държава членка, която сама може да се справи с това предизвикателство. Знаем обаче, че има много опити за двустранни отношения, които да дават посока в развитието на тази технология. За мен ще бъде истински важно Европа да остане с единен подход по отношение на този въпрос. Не само регулаторната рамка успяхме да актуализираме, но и аз се радвам, че успяхме да подкрепим индустриалното лидерство чрез инвестиции в научни изследвания и иновации, посредством това, което ние имаме навика да наричаме най-голямата правителствена изследователска програма за 5G в света. По-конкретно с 700 милиона евро публични инвестиции успяхме, считано от 2014 година, да мобилизираме около 4 милиарда евро за публично-частно партньорство 5G. Сега разбира се, че това е старта. Ние трябва да помислим как това публично-частно партньорство може да ни даде не само да имаме стандарти за 5G, но и да помислим за следващите фази оборудване, европейски доставчици, силни позиции. В допълнение с това партньорство успяхме и да стартираме. Поне имаме няколко важни примера. Европейска пилотна инфраструктура за изпитвания на 5G технологии. Мисля, че тук и в държавите членки много силно се усеща желанието да се върви напред. За нас е много важно преди въвеждането на пазара да имаме възможен, но максимален брой аргументи за това как заедно с държавите членки тези трансгранични магистрални коридори за 5G ще могат да работят, така че да позволят да се отида към следващ етап и приложение, а именно свързаните и автоматизирани решения за мобилност. Мисля, че все още имаме части в Европа, където тези коридори не са достатъчно добре застъпени. Много би ми се искало да избегнем разделението в една част от Европа да се върви много силно напред, друга да изостава. Имаме няколко такива разделения вече. Би ми се иска основните технологии да не преповтаряме такива разлики. Защото много бързо стигаме до въпроса за това къде стои Европа, докато другата част от света напредва. Те също не стоят на едно място. И затова ми се иска като Европа да използваме всички възможности от регулаторна рамка, през публично-частно партньорство и тестове, които да ни позволят не само да стартираме, но и истински да отвоюваме мястото си по отношение на 5G. Сега, на мен много би ми се искало да си поговорим за две важни точки. Най-напред по отношение на стандартите на 5G. Да обръщам внимание тук на две наши инициативи. Най-напред, благодарение на Европейския парламент към киберагенцията ЕНИСА има вече нова стейкхолдър груп, която за първи път ще даде предложения за европейски рамки за сертифициране на продукти и услуги по отношение на киберсигурността. Нееднократно съм го казвала, мисля, че по отношение на 5G това трябва да бъде едно от първите неща, които да направим на европейско ниво. На второ място, искам специално да благодаря на държавите членки, защото след публикуването март месец на нашата препоръка по отношение на общия подход за разгръщането на 5G, бяха при всички случаи по-реактивни от това, което сме виждали по отношение на други наши предложения. Защото 5G услугите трябва да бъдат защитени и тук мрежите, отново повтарям, не могат да бъдат защитени само в някои държави членки или в няколко региона. Те трябва да бъдат сигурни навсякъде, тъй като нашият вътрешен пазар преминава границите. По същия начин много силен фокус върху потребителите и операторите да не се сблъскват с нова фрагментация, както и с различни правила и изисквания. Това е едно от големите ни предизвикателства, което остава. Точно заради това, къде сме с държавите членки? Най-напред, официална препоръка, направена през месец март. Целта наистина беше да имаме цял общностен подход заедно с държавите членки относно необходимите мерки за защита и сигурност. Държавите членки през октомври бяха приключили с тяхната координирана оценка на риска. В момента ни предстои да дефинираме тези мерки, които ще бъдат приложени от всички държави членки. Тук има много експерти в залата. Ще се радвам и по време на конференцията да бъдат засегнати част от тях, защото оценката на риска, такава каквато е направена от държавите членки, се фокусира върху редица стратегически рискове, включително с веригите за доставка. Защото нека не забравяме, 5G ще увеличи взаимозависимостта между участниците в дигиталните вериги за доставки и ще дадат още по-голямо значение на доставчиците от трети страни. Това налага много внимателно да се оценят тези доставчици, степента на достъп и контрол, за да можем да избегнем свръхзависимости. Мисля, че това е посланието, което нашите европейски шампиони очакват. На мен наистина би ми се искало Европа да бъде европейска в цялостния си подход по темата. Затова чакаме следващия етап. До края на този месец държавите членки трябва да се съгласят, да постигнат съгласие относно инструментариума от мерки, като вече след това от януари месец, заедно с Европейския парламент, заедно с приемът от конференции като тази, ще успеем да направим следващите стъпки. Би ми се искало тук да засегна и още един въпрос. Както казах, това несъмнено е въпросът свързан с здравето, с това как гражданите виждат темата. Трябва да знаем, че за момента тази тема не е повдигана като такава в рамките на Европейската комисия. Мога да споделя, че с моя бивш екип от DigiConnect имахме дискусия по темата. Оказва се, че има един документ на съвета по отношение на въздействието на честотите върху здравето. Може би този форум е едно от местата, които да позволи тази тема да бъде говорена открито. Защото на никой от вас не е обягнало, че по темата вече има сериозни макро или микро, по-добре таргетирани или не дезинформационни кампании, не бива да ги подценяваме. Това означава, че има страхове, които могат да бъдат подхранвани, които могат да бъдат инструментализирани. За мен ще бъде много важно да имаме много голяма яснота по отношение на този въпрос и за инструментариума, с който разполагаме. Това е вече тема, която трябва да бъде обсъждана и с друг комисар. И за това, какви са следващите стъпки. Тук позицията ми е много лична, запазвам си правото да говоря и с другите комисари по тази тема, но мисля, че за да останем верни на този призив, който е към всеки един от вас, да запазим европейския подход, да е цялостен, не можем да избегнем такива важни аспекти. Това беше казано и от Иво Hristov. Много благодаря. От моя страна и аз и екипа ми ще продължим да следим темата изключително близо. Разбира се, че няма как да подминем и последната точка, която вече е пряко свързана с нашия технологичен суверенитет, с нашата независимост. Знам, че тези въпроси са много комплексни. Хубаво е също те обаче да бъдат много ясни. За нас принципа за реципрочност е един от водещите и мисля, че тук по темата и днешния форум ще даде своя принос. За мен е много важно да не се спираме върху това само какво ни пречи да вървим напред, къде изоставаме, а ясно да идентифицираме силите си, имаме ги, имаме свой опит. Напомням, че по отношение на 5G и патентите Европа е водеща в света, сякаш не го казваме толкова често. Имаме си ние своите европейски шампиони, за част от тях последните години бяхме свикнали да ги виждаме в негативната класация на платформите, но те се връщат с друга технология, още по-напредничава. Ще бъде важно нашите европейски доставчици да бъдат наистина европейски, като през цялото време в рамките на услугите, които предлагат, истинските грижи на хората и ползата за бизнеса да бъде взета в предвид. Така че благодаря за тази конференция. Да обсъдим още веднъж предимствата, но и притесненията, предизвикателствата от 5G, защото именно това е пътят за вземане на решение напред, когато всички гледни точки са взети в предвид. И аз благодаря наистина на всички за вниманието и да ви пожелая много резултатни дискусии. Благодаря.
Thank you very much, Commissioner and MEP Hristov, for your opening speeches there, and some really interesting points raised, particularly with regards to the natural evolution of 5G and perhaps various oversights that we may have made thus far with regards to health. As well, your point on a human-centric approach, Commissioner, I think is something that will ring a lot of bells in this room. And I'm sure also we're eager to hear more by the end of this year on these risk-alleviating measures that the European will announce after all member states have submitted their responses. Without further ado now, I'd like to move on to our first panel, and we'll be talking about really setting the scene for 5G, discussing opportunities for consumers and businesses. For this panel, I'd like to introduce Jeremy Godfrey, Chair of BEREC, the umbrella body for all EU electronic communications regulators, Mark van Koppelonale, Nokia Global Head of Government Relations Belgium, I hope I got your surname right there, apologies if not, and Laszlo Toth, Head of Public Policy of GSMA Europe. Jeremy, I'd like to start with you on this one. We have obviously China having made advances in the field of 5G, as well as having actually I think it's around 95% of the world's supply of gallium, which is used in the construction of chipsets for 5G. America has been making progress. South Korea has covered vast swathes of its territory with 5G. What's the state of play in Europe at the moment?
So, thanks very much. Maybe I should start off by thanking Mr. Hristov for inviting me and for organising this session. It's a real pleasure. So the state of play in Europe on 5G is, as Commissioner Gabriel was saying, decisions have been made about spectrum assignment, about 3 bands that have been chosen for Europe. So they are a lower frequency band, 700 megahertz, which would be very suitable for producing what coverage over a wide area, what they call a mid-band, which is suitable for providing capacity in cities, and a high band, 26 gigahertz, which is suitable for very, very, very high density deployments. I'm glad to say also that last month at the World Radio Conference of the ITU, the European chosen frequency 26 gig was adopted as a global standard as well, which will be very good for Europe because it will mean that the manufacturers will focus on producing equipment in that range. In terms of the assignment of frequencies, almost every member state has begun the frequency assignment process for the 700 megahertz and 3.6 gigahertz, the mid-band range. At the eastern extremity of the EU, there are sometimes some issues with coordination with non-EU member states that can cause delays. And the expectation is that for each of those two bands, the frequencies will be assigned in 2/3 of member states by the end of next year, and not long after the remaining member states. There are 8 or 9, maybe, I didn't check this morning, it keeps changing, it keeps going up, commercial deployments in different member states with commercial deployments. Very often there's more than one in some member states. But I think if we come to the kind of use of 5G, which is rather than just the kind of the networks, really it's everywhere in the world, whether you look at America or China or South Korea or Europe, it's really in its infancy. The uses that have been identified, the most obvious use is just more and better mobile broadband. So the things we use our phones for today, for 3G or 4G, as the Commissioner said, the growth in usage is 50% a year. Every year, mobile operators have to invest in providing more capacity to meet that growth in usage. It won't be long, maybe in the next 1 year or 2 years, before the most cost-effective way of meeting that increased demand will be to invest in 5G. And that will depend on people having handsets that are 5G capable, but I think that will happen very naturally quite soon. The other uses that people talk about, like smart precision agriculture, or smart cities, smart transport, smart waste management, are much less well advanced generally. But I would make the point that they're not all dependent on 5G. So there are already today agriculture applications. For example, there's a piece of equipment that a farmer can put on the tail of a cow, and that will alert the farmer when the cow is about to give birth to a calf. Now, cows are very expensive things, calves are very expensive, so it's really worth it for the farmer to be alerted to get to the cow in time. That already exists. That uses a 4G technology. So many of these new uses are already happening using 4G or even non-mobile technologies, and they will become enhanced and become more widespread when 5G comes. But I think it's quite important not to believe that you have to wait for 5G before you start deploying those new applications.
Okay, well maybe this would be a good opportunity to bring in Mark actually and talk about this jump from 4G to 5G. Is this something that citizens are kind of something that they're really desiring at the moment? What new markets will the jump from 4G to 5G open up potentially?
Thank you, Samuel, and also thank you to Hristov MEP for the invitation and for the opportunity to talk about 5G here. Indeed, I mean, if we look at the difference between 4G and 5G, I think there are a couple of things that are critical here. It's really a transformational effect. I mean, if you look at, for instance, the number of the capacity that 5G will bring compared to 4G, it's a jump, and of course, to bring capacity in a cost-effective way, at a certain stage you need to move technology. It's going to bring additional huge speeds, and I think we all know that, and we see that from a number of use cases around the world. It's much lower latency than 4G, meaning that a number of new use cases will be possible, and especially in terms of automation, in terms of the industrial sector. And that's something that is quite interesting, because many people say that 5G is the fifth generation of consumer connectivity, wireless connectivity, but it's actually the first generation of industrial wireless connectivity, and that I think important to understand. And also 5G will enable many simultaneous network slices, and that's important, of course, for the business models of the operators to get return on investment. And as we heard earlier today, the investment for 5G is huge. And finally, 5G will bring a much lower total cost of ownership, so the cost per bit to transport is much cheaper, much more efficient with 5G. So I think, and we heard it already from Jeremy, the first use cases are mainly about capacity, about bringing higher speeds to consumers, but the transformational effect will really be for enterprises with this low latency that will enable automation and will enable factories, will enable all sectors actually to digitalize. So I think that this is what we can say about the main differences between 4G and 5G.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. And of course, we have to consider whether these benefits and advantages come with or without a cost, and this is something that we'll focus on in the second panel. Laszlo, I'd like to bring in you now, and speaking a bit more about these various benefits that 5G could provide to industry. Two of Bulgaria's biggest sectors are, of course, the agricultural and the energy sectors. Specifically, what type of application could 5G have in these sectors in particular?
Thank you, Samuel. I also would like to thank Ivo Hristov for organizing this event. It's very timely and very important in terms of topics. For those of you who are not familiar with the GSMA, GSMA represents mobile network operators. We are a global organization. And indeed, as Jeremy and Mark well described, they are broadly agreed that there will be opportunities to transform industries. And indeed, one of the key areas, focus areas for also the mobile operators and the 5G industries is kind of the verticals and other industries. As mentioned earlier, the specific use cases are still not mature, and there are also this chicken and egg challenge that we will see those developing when the networks will be in place. And also some of the applications also in agriculture or energy or transport can be done via the 4G networks. And I also wanted to emphasize that beyond the connectivity and maybe the initial use cases around the broader capacity, what will come later is the opportunities beyond connectivity. And at the GSMA, we see it as the vision is more like an intersection of 5G, AI, IoT, big data. And if we talk about use cases and business opportunities, I think we need to consider those in a broader sense. We also surveyed sort of enterprise executives about the 5G opportunities and what they could expect. And 85% of them believe that 5G will help them save costs and improve efficiency, while 58% said that they expect to generate new revenues. I think those are the two major benefits which we can discuss or foresee in 5G networks.
Thank you very much, Laszlo. I'm talking more about, I suppose, the harmonisation of the European market with regards to spectrum assignment. Jeremy, you mentioned that there's a couple of countries in Europe's east that are perhaps particularly lagging behind. If this type of, shall we say, lagging continues, could it have possible future negative ramifications for the harmonisation of various European sectors generally?
So I wouldn't want to overemphasise, I think, the issues on the spectrum. I think soon enough we'll have the spectrum assigned across Europe. What I would say is that harmonisation isn't just about having all the same spectrum assigned. So in BEREC we've started a piece of work to look at what are all the other aspects that might be required. So just to give an example, I think we're all familiar with mobile roaming. And it's been a long journey for the Parliament, particularly to get Roam Like at Home introduced across Europe, which has been of massive benefit to European consumers. When you think about 5G and the roaming issues with 5G, we talked about network slices. So a network slice is a 5G network configured with a certain combination of latency and throughput and power requirements and so forth for a particular application. Now, although we have Roam Like at Home, you might have a 4G package at home, but when you roam, you only get 3G. That's still possible. There's nothing in the Roam Like at Home regulation to say you have to have the same 4G if it's available where you roam to. When that comes to 5G, it'll be even much more complicated to make sure that if you have a car that is connected, that needs 5G connectivity, or some other device that needs it, that is maybe being sold online and purchased by people in different member states, it needs to connect to a network slice with particular characteristics. How do we make sure that those network slices are all available in every member state? So it's not just about spectrum. There's a lot of questions to do with interoperability, to do with interconnection, to do with roaming, to do with to promote innovation in the 5G ecosystem. The internet unfortunately has been incredibly successful in being a platform for innovation. Small startups can reach a global market without having to do, in a very frictionless way. They don't have to make deals with internet service providers or mobile operators in every country. When it comes to 5G, and you're talking about devices that need particular network characteristics, how that market structure will work so that you can effectively, if you be in a garage somewhere, start with a startup and organise mobile connectivity, 5G mobile connectivity across 28 member states. That's a challenge that we don't know whether or not the market is going to do that or whether some regulation will be necessary. So we've got a project trying to, at the moment, it's just to ask all the questions, identify what are the questions that we'll need to get right, and ask stakeholders to help us prioritise those. There may not be questions that BEREC can answer, it may be questions for the Commission. The Commission talked about 5G standards. There may be new standards or standards that are required in areas we haven't yet thought of. So there is certainly a challenge to make the innovation ecosystem work in 5G that will go beyond just spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and one thing that strikes me as relevant in this regard is, of course, Europe's technological sovereignty, and the Commissioner referred to it at the start of her talk. Mark, how much does the concept of technological sovereignty come into the question of 5G, and particularly when we're thinking about the types of suppliers that Europe is working for? Is this a type of marketplace where we are able to rely on the clout and the ability of our European telecommunications suppliers, or do we have to simply look beyond our own borders?
Yeah, I think if you look at Europe, Europe has the ingredients for a strong 5G ecosystem, and we know that ecosystems are very important for the development of the use case. I mean, we have in Europe a very strong R&D base, we have industrial leadership, we have talents, so it's very important for governments and for industry and other stakeholders to work actually hand in hand to develop all this. So I think that Europe should also be not only in the uptake of the technology itself, but also in the development of standards, ethics, and 5G use cases working together to make sure that happens. I mean, if you look at 5G ecosystems, I mean, you could think, why did we, with 4G, not have more industries digitalizing? In fact, as I explained earlier, 4G did not have all the ingredients, not all the specifications to make that happen. But with 5G, and especially with the low latency, we will see that much more industries will be able to digitalize, and that's mainly due to the fact that with the enhanced reliability and the low latency, we will have the intensive industries that can digitalize. So as we said, energy sector, the transport sector, the manufacturing sector, all things that will not be able to digitalize with just 4G. Of course, with 4G, as Jeremy said, some things can be done, but mainly with 5G, you can take it a much step further. I mean, if you just look at car and transportation, with 4G, of course, you can digitalize already a number of things. I mean, you can, with your smartphone, localize where your car is, for instance. But it's only with 5G that with bringing the huge capacity that you will be able to have, for instance, 4K streaming in your car. And then with 5G and the low latency, you can move to automated driving. So I think this ecosystem build is something critical, and especially from an industrial perspective, I think Europe has key assets here to work on.
Thank you. Yes, Jeremy, you wanted to chime in there.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on automated driving and 5G, because I think this is one of the areas where, I hate to say it, there's maybe a little bit of industry hype around the relevance of 5G. If you talk to the car manufacturers, they talk about autonomous vehicles, and the clue is in the name. Autonomous means it doesn't need to be connected in order to work. No car manufacturer will make a car which can only be driven in a 5G coverage area. So the autonomous vehicles will work very well, even when there's no coverage of any mobile network, as well as where there is coverage. You're quite right. Certain aspects, 4K streaming into them, possibly in cities where you want to manage the traffic in a very smart way, and make the traffic lights know where the car wants to go. That kind of thing may at some point be enhanced with 5G, but I think there's a question of evolution versus revolution. Many of these things will have to be developed first to work with 4G, and then it will become enhanced with 5G. So I just want to say, don't think that we have to have 5G networks everywhere before anything can happen. I think a lot of this stuff can happen. And actually, in terms of digitalization, I was talking to someone from a port authority, from one of Europe's major ports, about whether they would be using 5G to move the containers around the ports more effectively. And one of the things he said to me is, you'd be amazed by how much paper we still have in our business for customs declarations and so forth. So he said, we kind of need to digitalize even that kind of stuff. The industry is very conservative before we even start to think about really using these kind of wireless technologies. So just another thing to think about. It's not just about the wireless. There's a lot of other things that have to happen to get all the benefits.
Right, just to follow up on that one quickly, towards the end of the last mandate, there was a lot of discussion over this delegated act on CV2X connected to everything. Are you saying, Jeremy, therefore, that CV2X technologies aren't fully dependent on 5G connectivity? Can they be connected with 4G networks?
So I think, I'm not an expert on CV to everything, connected vehicles to everything. What I would say is that there are certain applications that you can imagine of, say, getting rid of all the traffic lights in a city and having the cars directed through the junctions by smart, effectively an artificially intelligent policeman standing at the junction, getting people to come so the cars never have to slow down as they go through the junction. That obviously requires extremely reliable connectivity of the sort that only 5G can provide, otherwise the cars will smash up in the middle of the junctions. But to bring that about, you have to have almost every car by then has to be connected. So it will evolve, but it'll be, it must be a decade away before you even have a penetration. Even one person on a bicycle can mess up a junction like that. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine these things, and you certainly imagine things that will require 5G, but there's an awful lot that can be done beforehand.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It strikes me as we may be seeing connected bicycles in the not too distant future. Laszlo, coming back to the point made by Mark earlier about the digitalisation of industry, it strikes me as particularly problematic with regards to Europe's central and eastern countries that when we are digitalising these industries and sectors, for example, the agricultural industry or even the construction industry, do workers on the ground actually have the skills to operate these burgeoning forms of technology? Or do we face a digital skills gap in certain sectors?
I think digital skills would definitely be a challenge in the near future. Not necessarily in terms of users space, but also as we see networks are moving a little bit from hardware-based to software-based solutions. There will be a need for different type of skills, and obviously it's part of the member states and national plans, and also the European Commission's initiatives to improve on that front. I think I also, maybe it's just kind of the timeline issue, because what we also discussed, things will come gradually. However, there is still kind of a race to reach the 5G era as soon as possible, and many countries have recognized the strategic importance of 5G and developed national plans and also measures to accelerate the deployment and stimulate the new services. And we discussed whether we have already the business case or the use cases, or whether that's the 5G or the network development will bring us to more use cases. And I just wanted to reflect a little bit on the challenge and how governments play a key role to reduce the costs and accelerate the deployment of 5G. The European Commission estimated that it will cost 500 billion euros to meet the connectivity targets for Europe, including covering urban areas. And I just checked to put this into context that over the past 5 years, European operators invested 130 billion euros. So definitely there's a gap, and there are a lot of things. Spectrum was mentioned as one of the biggest costs when it comes to the 5G deployment, but also I think soon in the next panel will be discussions about the deployment policies, which is rubber hits the road when the physical network is built. There are many countries where you need 12 or 24 months to get a license to take up a new base station. There are many procedures which are bureaucratic, multi-layered. These are also a huge burden and cost. And I think these are the issues where regulators can help a lot to accelerate the deployment of 5G and bring those networks to life, and then give the opportunity to the use cases to come.
Yeah, thank you, Laszlo. I'm just going to turn to Jeremy briefly for one last comment before we open up the floor to your questions.
Yeah, I was going to just echo actually the importance of local government in 5G that I think Laszlo was alluding to. I think there are really three things I would say about local government. One is it's very tempting when budgets are cut to see 5G as a revenue opportunity. But please, local governments should not try to charge for the use of street furniture, should not try to charge for the permits. They do need to get make the process quick and cheap and streamlined. Secondly, I see the panel talks about opportunities for consumers and businesses. I would add to that opportunities for government, the public sector, and I think particularly municipal governments. There's a lot that can be done in smart waste collection, smart traffic management. Some of the early use cases and business cases may well be local government. In fact, I was in China earlier in the year, looking at some of the uses they're making of 5G there. The corresponding use in Europe would almost certainly be a municipal use. And the third thing, which kind of is a link into the last panel, local governments I think have a role in being responsible about health issues and also in their own use, maintaining trust on things like security and privacy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Just a very quick point on that, because I believe the Bulgarian Prime Minister announced in November that there would be discounted rates for the spectrum frequency, and I believe the Bulgarian government is supporting these initiatives in pursuance of their 5G future. Mark, just very briefly, talking about the role governments play with regards to 5G, how do you think this type of technology can be leveraged to help citizens across Europe access more efficient public services?
Yeah, I think there are indeed a number of use cases that are important here. I mean, and we didn't talk about that a lot, but I mean, if you look at e-health, for instance, I mean, the potential of 5G to actually have a more efficient health situation. So by freeing beds from hospital or by being able to enable people to get the good care from home. Obviously, if you look at 4G, a number of things are possible today by tracking the health of people, for instance, and you will have this kind of trackers. But on the other hand, with 5G, you will be able to get to bringing a doctor through a virtual way, in a place where no doctors are perhaps available, and think about remote surgery, for instance. So I think that looking at 5G, there are still many use cases that we have to discover. Ecosystems will be critical for that. And we talked about digital skills, meaning that sectors that are not used to work with digital things will need to learn the language of digital. And digital will need to learn the language of other sectors to be able to see and to build the matching use cases. So I think that here the government can bring a lot of help as well in making sure that these skills are upgraded and facilitating the upgrade of skills. So yeah, that's I think an important point.
Great, thank you. We've got 15 minutes before the start of the second panel now to open up the floor for questions. So if you would like to ask one of our panellists a question, please raise your hand, introduce yourself and let us know who your question is directed towards. Do we have anyone brave enough to make the first step? This regard. Anyone? Yes?
Good afternoon. Henk Manekens from British Telecom BT. Thank you very much for the interesting different perspectives on 5G. I in particular wanted to ask some questions in relation to the 5G security. There is a lot of mentioning about the future direction on certification, etc. So on that I have a couple of points. So first of all, so how will that practically be implemented? So does it mean our laboratories, certifications agencies in Europe ready? Do they have the resources and the staff to do this 5G certification? Secondly, what kind of timeline could one expect in that area? And thirdly, also, for some companies it will be, I guess, companies who are in multiple markets. Are we talking about a national certification that has to be repeated in each country? Or can we also have a kind of European certification?
Thank you.
Maybe start with that, yeah.
Yeah, so if we start with the certification framework to begin with, Jeremy, would you like to take this one?
I'll do my best, but I should say that the 5G cybersecurity is really an ENISA and Commission issue. So BEREC, we play a role as an inputter of technical expertise around particularly around the toolbox, the tools that might be used to manage cybersecurity risks. So what I can say is that, out of the risk assessment, first of all, 5G cybersecurity is clearly very important. And I think that's why, as the Commissioner was saying earlier, the member states cooperated in this whole process in a very smooth and enthusiastic way. And I think the certification is only really one tool in the toolbox. So there will be other things that people will need to do to identify and manage the 5G cybersecurity risks. I think in terms of your questions about how long it will take, I don't know whether we have the resources. I don't know the answer to that. In terms of will there be an EU-wide certification, again, I can't give you an absolute answer, but I would suspect that that would make a lot of sense to have an EU-wide certification of the aspects that are being certified. But of course, national security is a member state competence, not a community competence, not an EU competence. So how the risk is assessed in each member state, particularly the state actor risk, which was identified in the report, different states may well identify that risk assess that risk in a different way, and may well also have different approaches to mitigating it. So it's not necessarily going to be the same thing will happen, the same approach to risk management will happen in every member state, but there'll be a common toolbox. And I imagine that certification will be a common thing for the things that are being certified, but obviously that's only one tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, 5G is intrinsically a geopolitical issue as well, so one would assume that certain certification schemes, at the national level at least, may be impacted by different geopolitical stances. Laszlo, I wanted to bring you in on this subject of an EU-wide certification for 5G. Is this something that your members would prefer?
Yes, I fully agree, and security is a topic which is very important for all members. Not just now. For many years, they have been implementing multiple layers of security measures in the networks, and indeed, we do support an approach which the Commission recommended in March. Something which is based on a facts and a risk-based assessment. We are happy to work together with authorities and ENISA, and actually we are also trying to contribute to their efforts to come up with a certification scheme. And yeah, this is something which we think is very important and we support.
Okay. And Mark, just to bring you in here on this one, with regards to the different stances member states currently have on 5G cybersecurity and certification in particular, despite the fact that the Commission, of course, has planned for a coordinated schedule for the launch of 5G in 2020, are we at risk of some member states going in completely different directions?
I think if you look at 5G and cybersecurity, of course, we know that 5G will underpin the digitalization of many sectors. So it is important that it is well addressed. We also see that 5G networks are far more complex than previous networks. Previously we had purpose-built networks, but with 5G networks, you have really networks that are multi-layer, multi-process, multi-products, and so if you look at, for instance, what we are doing at Nokia is making sure that we have a design for security process, and that means that along the full chain, starting from the development of the products, when we make the concepts of the products, when we manufacture the products, before they are actually shipped, there is a full list of security checks to be done, and otherwise those products can actually not reach the market. So I think here collaboration is really needed at many levels between industry, with governments, to make sure that we secure the 5G technologies as good as we can, as we of course understand that 5G will underpin all these very important use cases, and as we said before, some lives might actually depend on some use cases. If you think, for instance, about this remote surgery or other kind of applications.
Absolutely, and just to follow up on your point about security by design, Jeremy, do you think this principle of security from the design stage is something that would calm security fears concerning 5G?
Look, I think security by design, in fact anything by design, is the best way to achieve something important. So whether that's privacy by design, security by design, all those things, it's much better to do those assessments and do it at the design stage. If you try and bolt that on at the end, it's never going to be as effective. But of course, the key issue is to identify what are the security risks and then what are the mitigation measures and include them in the design.
Absolutely. Great. Do we have any other questions here? Yes, over here please.
Yes, Sophie Petitjean, Agence Europe, journalist for Agence Europe. So I have a follow-up question regarding this debate about Huawei, of course. So it seems that the toolbox won't say you have to ban or not banning this company. So I just wanted to have your opinion on that and maybe your expectation about how the EU as a bloc could deal with such an issue with so many different point of view and maybe different assessments, as the US is repeatedly saying that there are risks, and on the other side, the company swear that they work in good faith. So maybe a general comment about that.
Great, thanks Sophie. So security is an issue that we're going to bring up in the second panel, but I'm sure our panellists now are enthusiastic, to say the least, to give their opinion on that one. Maybe we could turn to Laszlo for a response on this one.
Yeah, I think I just said we welcome the European approach. Of course, we do respect the government's rights to defend the citizens' security and privacy in a way they feel appropriate. However, we believe that this risk-based, facts-based approach is the best one to follow, and in general, the objectives should be to keep the vendors, the supply chain competitive and innovative in order to support the development of 5G in the near future. We hope that the efforts by the Commission and NIS and others will come up with a solution which will prove to be a one for a Europe-wide use.
Thank you. And I'd just like to bring in Mark on this point. So 5G, as I said earlier, has become an intrinsically geopolitical discussion. Are you comfortable with this? Are EU telecoms companies comfortable with the fact that now we can't really talk about 5G without also talking about the US and China?
I mean, on these things, I mean, this is really for the EU and the EU member states to decide, so I will not comment on that.
Okay, we had another question from this gentleman here.
My name is Klaus Buchner, I'm a member here. I think the discussion which is going on now is only half of the story, because already now we have the situation that people are forced to give their consent to data flows, very personal data flows, if they want to have access to basic services. So cybersecurity from the technical point of view is one thing, but 5G opens a tremendous amount of new information. And well, my first PhD student was a specialist in coding and cybersecurity, so I know a little bit about it. But that is really not the question, as a basic question. Data flow out in a completely different way. And that's my primary fear with 5G, because you have a tremendous amount of information, for example, by emotion recognition and things like that. So how do you want to take this?
Yeah, it's a very relevant point, particularly when we're talking about digitalisation of public services and, of course, the Bulgarian Prime Minister's initiatives in e-government. Jeremy, I'd like you to respond to this one on the fears and the concerns around data flows.
Look, I think this is a really important point, and it's not just about 5G, it's about all the platforms who gather data in other ways as well. So whilst the big platforms have brought a lot of benefits to end users and have transformed many aspects of life, as they've grown bigger and more powerful, you certainly hear a lot of voices saying that with that power should come corresponding responsibility, and that there is a need to address questions about harmful content on the platforms. There's a need to address questions about how data is used. It's all very well, as you say, to say we've got a privacy policy that people agreed to. Nobody ever reads the privacy policy. I think somebody did a test of how long it would take to read it aloud, and it was 36 hours, I think, to read all the terms and conditions from a few popular platforms. So there are consumer protection issues. There are also competition issues when people as you say, you're forced to sign up. It's because there's no alternative. There's nobody else competing by saying, oh, we'll give you the service, but we won't use your data in that way. That's rare. So when we have these markets where instead of paying for services with money, you pay for it with data, that makes a big difference to the interests of end users, both from a protection point of view and from a competition point of view. I know that in the Commission's new priorities, Europe Fit for the Digital Age, Madame Vestager is looking at how to modernise the use of competition policy. Monsieur Breton has a Digital Services Act coming forward. So this, I imagine, will be an incredibly important topic for the Parliament over the next few years. How to regulate the use of the power of the platforms, the way they use data, but how to do that in a way which doesn't inhibit the innovation and the bringing of the benefits to end users. How we square that circle will be a really important topic of conversation. I'm afraid I can't come today with a magic answer to that question, but I think it's a question we're going to have to be debating over the next little while.
Absolutely, and simply by virtue of the fact that 5G delivers a much higher capacity network, flows of data are going to increase exponentially. Is consumer protection something at the top of your list of priorities, Laszlo, when we're thinking about the future rollout of 5G?
I think we touched upon a few of the most important topics when it comes to consumer protection, security, privacy. And as I would like to echo what Jeremy said, that there are still maybe when this intelligent connectivity comes a reality with not just 5G but the big data and the AI, there are still some considerations or challenges regulators need to deal with. Probably there will be more consideration given to the data as currency, and also the network effect in these new services and markets. And of course, we look forward more outcome of the work which is currently being done at the EU level on AI and the ethical use of AI. Also, I note that the new Commission put digital and also AI in one of the priorities and one of the early deliverables. So we follow these developments very closely and we'll try to be a constructive contributor in the debate.
Thank you. A lot of these issues that are coming up now relate to privacy, which is of course the subject of our second panel. So we're going to spend a couple of minutes now doing a brief substitution of the panels, and if I could ask our panellists perhaps to swap seats. I believe that's what we're doing. And can I invite... Oh no, you don't need to. It's okay, our second panel is here already. I hadn't seen you at the end there. So, sorry about that. So today's second panel will be focusing on the challenges to come with regards to Europe's future in 5G. And of course here we're thinking about things like security, privacy and health. Joining us to discuss these issues we have Paul Lanoy, Chairman of GRAP, the Group for Reflection and Action for Ecological Policy, an honorary MEP, of course former MEP as well. Professor Vladimir Pulkov, which is this gentleman here, Head of the Intelligent Communications Infrastructure Research and Development Laboratory at Sofia Tech Park. And then we have George Oikonomou, Senior Engineer in the 5G team at VMware, the cloud computing company. So I'd like to start now perhaps by speaking about one of the more contentious issues that hasn't been really covered in detail too much, at least here in Brussels anyway, and that's talking about health with regards to various concerns that have emerged at the beginning, well, for the past couple of years actually. And Paul, I understand that you actually wrote a letter to the Belgian authorities at the beginning of the year highlighting your concerns over the potential health impacts that 5G waves could have on various sectors of the population. Could you tell us a bit more about the concerns you raised here?
Un petit tour en arrière, s'il vous plaît. J'ai été pendant 15 ans parlementaire européen et en 1994, donc il y a 25 ans, j'ai été l'auteur d'un rapport d'initiative de la Commission de l'environnement sur la pollution électromagnétique et les mesures que nous souhaitions en tant que Parlement proposer de la part de la Commission européenne. Et à l'époque, une résolution a été votée. Vous savez que les résolutions du Parlement n'ont pas toujours beaucoup de poids, mais celle-là avait quand même un certain intérêt puisque nous disions qu'il fallait appliquer le principe de précaution qui était depuis le sommet de Rio en 1992, qui était acquis au niveau international, et appliquer aussi le principe à l'ARA, c'est-à-dire les doses doivent être aussi basses que possible en matière de pollution électromagnétique. Si je reviens là-dessus, c'est parce que, en fait, la Commission européenne n'a absolument pas tenu compte de cette prise de position du Parlement. Et en 1999, lorsqu'il a fallu recommander aux États membres d'adopter des législations de protection contre les rayonnements non ionisants, la Commission s'est basée sur les recommandations de l'ICNIC, qui est un organisme international issu de l'industrie, qui se base pour les valeurs seuil proposées à l'émission, c'est-à-dire reçues par les personnes, qui se base sur deux principes. Un, il ne faut pas que l'exposition induise des courants électriques dans le corps humain, et il ne faut pas que le corps humain soit échauffé au-delà de 0,1 degré de ce qu'est la température normale. Donc c'est l'aspect strictement énergétique qui a été pris en considération. Il est apparu au fil du temps que c'était absolument insuffisant pour expliquer un certain nombre de dommages à la santé qui ont pu être mesurés, mis en évidence au fil des années. En fait, la base scientifique de ces valeurs seuil est une base scientifique périmée et elle a été mise en cause par des milliers d'études émanant de revues à comité de lecture qui ont montré des effets biologiques à des niveaux largement inférieurs, et quand je dis largement, ça va jusqu'à 1000 fois inférieur, au seuil considéré comme inoffensif, surtout lorsqu'il s'agit de micro-ondes pulsées. Et on est clairement dans le cas avec la téléphonie mobile et avec le 2G, la 3G, la 4G et bien entendu encore plus avec la 5G, puisque là, comme vous l'avez dit tous jusqu'à présent, il y a une accélération en matière de transfert de données et cette accélération va impliquer nécessairement une augmentation significative de l'exposition. Alors, les dommages à la santé qui ont été fréquemment rapportés dans ces milliers d'études vont du stress oxydant aux lésions de l'ADN simple brin ou double brin l'altération de l'expression génique, le cancer, l'infertilité, l'altération de la qualité du sperme, les troubles cardiaques et les effets neurologiques de toutes sortes, en ce compris la dépression. Ce qui est apparu, c'est que la non prise en compte de la durée de l'exposition, de la période de la vie auquel l'exposition a lieu, je pense par exemple aux embryons, qui sont manifestement beaucoup plus vulnérables qu'un individu adulte, tout cela invalide manifestement les normes qui sont actuellement toujours en vigueur. Alors, je vais arriver à la 5G tout de suite parce que vous m'avez posé la question de la lettre que j'ai envoyée au Conseil supérieur de la santé, lettre qui insistait surtout sur le fait qu'on va passer aux ondes millimétriques dans des gammes de fréquences qui ont été très peu étudiées. Et je m'interrogeais sur la validité de l'ancienne approche qui est toujours en vigueur. Je n'ai pas eu de réponse, mais il est apparu dans un document officiel publié en mai dernier que, indirectement, et je ne voudrais pas croire, je n'oserais pas croire que c'est à cause de ma lettre, mais en tout cas, les scientifiques qui font partie de ce Conseil supérieur de la santé belge, qui est un organe consultatif de haute importance pour le gouvernement et pour toutes les instances de décision, ont inclus dans leur rapport de mai 2019, donc il y a quelques mois, les rayonnements non ionisants de micro-ondes pulsées agissent via activation des canaux calciques dépendants du voltage, induisant des impacts biologiques à des niveaux non thermiques. Là, on est clairement en dessous. Les niveaux non thermiques, ce sont les niveaux nettement en dessous des effets thermiques qui sont la base des normes actuelles. Donc, au niveau européen, on est toujours à cette vieille conception de l'effet strictement énergétique. Donc ici, il y a une porte ouverte de la part du Conseil supérieur de la santé qui dit attention, il y a déjà des effets biologiques importants au niveau non thermique. Donc voilà ma réponse. En plus, ils ajoutent que l'exposition à des champs de très basse fréquence induit aussi des troubles pour les enfants à naître, c'est-à-dire les embryons, notamment les femmes enceintes qui ont reçu des rayonnements fréquents de téléphone portable, donnent naissance à des enfants qui présentent après coup des troubles neurologiques dans leur enfance. Donc c'est aussi dans le rapport. Voilà ma réponse à votre question.
Thank you, Paul. Of course,
Je n'ai pas fini.
no, of course, I'm sure there's more to come as well, but I just want to bring in some of the other
Avec la
speakers
5G,
here.
que se passe-t-il avec la 5G? Je
Of
pense que tout le monde est d'accord pour dire qu'il va y avoir une accélération. Tout le monde souhaite cette accélération. Moi, je souhaite le contraire. Je souhaite au contraire qu'il y ait un moratoire. Et il y a des centaines de scientifiques impliqués dans les études sur le bioélectromagnétisme qui demandent ce moratoire, qui ont écrit à la Commission européenne il y a déjà 1 an et demi, sans réponse, qui ont écrit à toutes les instances internationales sans réponse. Or, ces personnes sont des scientifiques qui ont publié dans les revues à comité de lecture des articles que j'ai évoqués de façon très brève il y a quelques instants.
Okay, thank you. I'd just like to bring in a couple of the other speakers now, just to follow up on this point that you're making, because of course, let's remember, health is a very important issue for us, but at the same time, these concerns did manifest themselves with the emergence of other telecommunications technologies over the past 25 years. Vladimir, I'd like to turn to you now and ask you, firstly, 2 questions. It appears from what Paul is saying that the Commission is reluctant to produce a health impact report on 5G. Why do you think that's the case? And also, are the concerns that Paul highlighted, are they legitimate? I mean, are they, because this is by no means a unanimous stance.
Okay, first, I would like to thank Mr. Hristov for the invitation here. Actually, I'm a telecom engineer. I'm a university professor and a researcher. I cannot comment really health issues because I'm not an expert. Usually I rely on the expert's opinion. But what I would like to mention is just to turn the things a little bit around. First, in the first panel discussion, we have said 5G will allow this, and will enable different applications and so on. Actually, what I think that we have driving forces which force us to implement, which will force us to implement 5G. Because 5G is actually an opportunity, chance to realize all the things what we plan or what we consider or what we need in the future. We speak about smart cities, we speak about artificial intelligence. Can we do artificial intelligence without big data? No. Can we do big data without wireless broadband communications? No. We speak about ultra reliable and low latency communications. They are very important for critical services. We mentioned also health applications and so on. We speak about augmented reality now. Everywhere is going on. We know that in such applications we cannot allow delays, so we need low latency. So actually, if we consider to develop our future as we plan, with implementing artificial intelligence, smart cities, everything, we need 5G. Because 5G will remove some of the, drawbacks of 4G. And this is what we see, technology advances. 2G, 3G, everything actually builds upon what the other technologies cannot provide. On the other hand, we also speak about 5G will be more energy efficient than 4G. This is what we speak about. We speak about 5G implementing in different bands. This is what we speak about. It's not general 5G, and so we have to consider how to say the situation a little bit more realistic from this point of view. Can we go without 5G or not? My personal opinion, we cannot go. People now start researching in my field about 6G and so on. But the driving forces are other. No, we don't employ 5G just because it's fun. We need it. This is my point. Okay, the other issues is about what are considered here. As I said, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a researcher in this field. Okay, we have to have some standards. We have to have some norms. And even what Commissioner Gabriel mentioned, we have to have infrastructures to test 5Gs, to test platforms, because there will be many challenges, many issues. By the deployment, okay, we say dense deployment, okay, there will be low-level power, but still there could be some interference between the cells, and all these are technical things. I don't want to go into details, but I think we should, as an engineer, that my two key points are we cannot go without 5G, and we have to have the standards technological we have it now, almost everywhere. We have made norms also, and now what we're questioning is, are these norms okay or not? So I cannot, I'm not an expert in this.
Okay, I'd just like to bring in George now, who's sitting very uncomfortably in between both sides of the debate there. How do we square this circle? How do we make sure that health concerns are taken into account, should they be legitimate, but that we also need 5G? George.
Okay, I think, first of all, thank you also for the invitation to be here today. Yeah, I think 5G is the natural evolution of things, because a lot of applications will start to come up, and each of these applications will require some new things. So bandwidth was so far the main concern for applications. So we're looking for broadband to extend the bandwidth to applications. Though now we see applications coming for ultra low latency. Okay, so this could be a lot of cases. So it could be health cases, smart cities, everything that would benefit from low latency. And of course, the third aspect of the 5G is the massive IoT base, because now we talk about hundreds of millions of devices that would attach to a 5G network. So in this context, I think that the 5G and the technologies it's going to support the 5G, it's the natural evolution. Now the spectrum aspect, it's of course important because now we are going to reuse spectrum from all previous generations to reuse bands, but also we are going to millimeter wave. And I think from physics perspective, one of the key aspects of the millimeter wave is that it will require line of sight. So you will need at some point to build a dense network of antennas, because the further you go with frequencies, the lower range you get. So millimeter wave would be probably obstacle. It could not penetrate a wall or something like that. So we need to build a different kind of network, and this will expand a lot the complexity of the physical network. But at the same time, having a denser network, I think it means also lower emission rates. So you have a dense network. For example, in this room we have these tens of lamps here that just have a medium, let's say, density, as compared to having a big lamp at some place of the room and sending out some much more radiation, let's say, from light radiation. So I would compare to something like this, the case of having dense networks. And I think it's going to be one of the things that will be needed.
Of course, and the jury may be still out on the health issue, in fact, but moving on to another impact, potentially the environmental impact of building these denser network infrastructures. What could the environmental impact of these types of things be, Paul?
Il y a comme des études récentes qui sont parues dans les 2 dernières années, montrant notamment que les ondes millimétriques risquent d'avoir un potentiel désastreux sur les insectes. Parce que les insectes ont une taille qui, justement, est de l'ordre de quelques millimètres. Beaucoup d'insectes. Et ils absorberaient ainsi beaucoup plus le rayonnement de ces ondes millimétriques, ce qui entraînerait des dégâts sur leur comportement et voire sur leur survie. Donc, plusieurs études ont été publiées à ce sujet, notamment une qui date de 2018, qui est assez effrayante. Donc, je pense qu'on ne peut pas faire semblant que ça n'existe pas. Donc, voilà, c'est l'étude de Tillens et al. J'ai donné les références ici, donc ceux qui souhaitent peuvent avoir chez Madame Ivadova la copie de l'intervention que j'avais prévue, mais comme ça ne se déroule pas comme je croyais que ça se déroulerait, j'ai répondu à des questions et je n'ai pas eu l'occasion de développer mon argumentation complètement. En plus, on n'a pas beaucoup de temps. Mais voilà en tout cas une étude qui ici est très à prendre en considération pour ce qui concerne la biodiversité. Ça c'est un. Il y a un deuxième aspect, c'est que, comme on l'a dit, comme tous les intervenants l'ont dit, on va avoir une croissance exponentielle du transfert de données. Donc même si l'efficacité de la 5G sur le plan énergétique, l'efficacité technique est supérieure et qu'on consomme par unité d'action moins d'énergie, la multiplication des interventions va faire qu'on va consommer beaucoup plus. Donc je réfute tout à fait l'argument qui dit que ça a un impact positif sur la consommation d'énergie. Si vous avez une voiture qui consomme moins, mais que vous avez beaucoup plus de voitures, le résultat global sera une plus grosse consommation de carburant. C'est la même chose ici. Si par transfert d'une donnée, on consomme moins d'énergie, mais qu'on transfère beaucoup plus de données, et c'est le but, ben forcément, vous allez consommer beaucoup plus d'énergie. Donc l'argument ne tient pas. J'attire aussi l'attention sur un autre aspect environnemental, c'est l'utilisation des matières premières rares. Les métaux rares qui sont utilisés dans les technologies électroniques, et notamment, pas seulement pour la 5G, mais enfin aussi pour la 5G, ces métaux doivent être extraits. Ça implique nécessairement aussi une grosse consommation d'énergie à l'extraction, et ça implique une raréfaction de ces métaux qui sont déjà pas très largement répartis dans le monde. Il y a quelques pays qui maîtrisent. Donc là aussi, on se met d'une part sous la coupe des pays producteurs et d'autre part, on participe d'un épuisement des ressources non renouvelables qui me préoccupe. J'ai la prétention de dire que je ne suis pas un craintif. Comme vous avez semblé dire, j'ai des craintes, on a des craintes. Madame la commissaire parlait de crainte. Moi, je ne suis pas un craintif. Je suis, comme la plupart des intervenants ici, je suis un scientifique dur, parce que je suis physicien de formation à d'autres époques, et j'ai travaillé notamment en astrophysique et en radioastronomie. Et dans ce domaine-là, on constate que l'impact sur le vivant a une importance considérable. Je me suis, au fil du temps, intéressé aux problèmes écologiques, et je suis devenu militant écologiste et parlementaire écologiste. Donc, je ne suis pas du tout un craintif, mais je suis lucide. Et je pense qu'ici, il y a un grand manque de lucidité parmi tous les intervenants qui ne voient que le point de vue des ingénieurs et le point de vue des techniciens. Et moi, ça m'énerve. Je le dis franchement.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. There's a point you made about rare earths. If you could just turn your microphone up, please. Yeah. The point you made about rare earths is very, very interesting indeed. I believe the point was made earlier that China has about 95% of the world's supply of gallium nitrate. And what's, of course, very important in this discussion as well is considering Europe's geopolitical position amid the current 5G debate. Pursuing a more perhaps Bulgarian angle here, the Prime Minister Borisov recently went to the White House and had a meeting with President Donald Trump, in which Trump said that he would expect further collaboration with Bulgaria on 5G issues in particular. Vladimir, do you envisage that amid this geopolitical context, Bulgaria will adopt a position perhaps that is more sympathetic to what the Americans want, rather than opening their doors perhaps to Chinese suppliers?
Well, this is a question. I'm not a politician, so I cannot comment on such issues, but I just maybe want to comment on what my colleague here said, that I'm also a scientist. Okay, I'm an engineer, I'm not a biologist, but what bothers me is the words could, may, maybe. I'm a little bit mathematician, so for me things are more or less, does this comply to standards or not, or what are the things and so on. So I'm a little bit worried that things as might, could, or should, maybe, could are part of, how to say, this discussion. You know, I really think that we should take into account health issues for sure. This is under no doubt. But just to bring issues like, okay, if we have more car but more economic, they will consume more. So can we say that the lights here consume more than the lights that we have had a few years ago with bulbs, with heatings and so on? No, it is a technological issue. If we can manage technology in such a way that could be more efficient, more green, it's okay. This is my point of view. So sorry about not commenting the political issues. It's as I want to come back, 5G will come. We need it. But how it will come, we need to discuss it here. We need to discuss the security issues. They are really to be discussed and to be taken with it. We have to discuss the health issues, the privacy issues, but we have to solve these challenges.
Of course, but going back to your point about this purely being a technical issue, EU telecoms ministers, I think, adopted a conclusion last week stating that the EU's approach to 5G cybersecurity should be comprehensive and risk-based, while also taking into account non-technical factors. George, how do you interpret these non-technical factors?
Well, as an engineer also myself, I can definitely talk about the technical aspect. But of course, any technology will come with non-technological aspect, and of course, this technology that will affect everyone's life in the coming year. So, I mean, okay, just to think about what is the differentiation of these new technologies now, and to understand a bit more about what are the key differences in the change of our lives. I would say the 5G network is not only about humans. It's going to be also about machines. Okay, so it's going to be data that flow around the network, and this data will belong to machines. Okay, sensors talking to each other, or you know, it could be health devices that belong to humans also. It could be human communication. So one key aspect is what are the rights of this data? That should be all equally treated as you know, the same security regulations, probably. Because for humans, we do have, and that's a good thing, we do have some very good regulation. But what happens when machines will start to talk? And machines going to be a primary participant of this 5G network. So things like slicing, for example, network slicing that will come, is going to let's say, take a full infrastructure, virtualize it, and then cut it in logical slices. Okay, so slices would have different different security requirements, probably. So in this context, we could see that some of the traffic could be very well protected, while others could be more permissive, not so strong, to save resources and be also more, you know, if we go further, okay, we could see that, you know, having lower, not so sophisticated encryption for some kind of data, if not needed, we could save also energy resources by that in the long term, because massive IoT is going to be a big thing in the next 10 years.
Absolutely. So perhaps green initiatives can go hand in hand with 5G. We'll have to wait and see. We've got 15 minutes left, and we've still got a couple of closing speeches to give, but also I'd like to take the opportunity to open up the floor to any questions from our participants. We've got one from this lady over here, and then back to Klaus Buchner. Thank you.
Bonjour, donc mon nom est Inès Trépand, je travaille pour le groupe des Verts en tant que collaboratrice. J'aurais une question en particulier à M. Pulkov, parce qu'en entendant ses propos, donc, il insiste très fort comme quoi la 5G, il la faut, et on a un peu l'impression que la technologie devient un but à part entière. Alors la question que je voudrais lui poser, c'est comment il tient compte du développement de ces technologies par rapport aux deux graves crises systémiques auxquelles nous devons faire face. La première est la crise climatique, on le sait, donc pour le moment, le politique n'a pas été à la hauteur de l'exigence, de l'urgence climatique, mais la deuxième crise dont on parle beaucoup moins, qui est la crise de la biodiversité. Or, alors le problème, c'est qu'on sait de plus en plus, on se penche sur la valeur, je dirais même économique, de tous ces services écosystémiques. Donc, si il n'y a pas de services écosystémiques qui peuvent être en fonction, il n'y a pas de compétitivité possible à long terme. Donc, à un moment donné, par exemple, quand on voit l'effet que ça peut avoir sur les insectes, mais s'il y a une disparition des insectes, c'est toute l'économie qui tombe. Donc, on le voit, on parle notamment des pollinisateurs, mais ce n'est que la partie émergée de l'iceberg. Donc, quelque part, Si on veut vraiment avoir une approche holistique par rapport aux crises, on ne peut pas, pour moi, partir du point de vue que ça ne se discute pas, c'est le développement de l'écologie, et on va voir comment on va pouvoir finalement peser le pour et le contre en ayant à la fois être dans une stratégie gagnant-gagnant sur le plan économique, environnemental et social. Je crois que là, quelque part, c'est faux et qu'il faudrait pouvoir revoir les choses. Donc moi, ma question que je pose à M. Ploukov, comment réconcilie-t-il, dans son optique, le fait qu'il estime que c'est indispensable d'avoir ce développement technologique face à la crise climatique ou de la biodiversité, qui demanderait au contraire d'inverser les priorités?
Okay, I don't know, it's, you speak about holistic approach, and this is my point of view also. We have to consider all the things, and I think I clearly mentioned that we have to consider the health issues, the security issues, the environmental issues. We have to consider them, but we have to consider them from all aspects. First, there are two things which this is my personal. We have driving forces which, as I mentioned, which lead us to the implementation of 5G. And I think so. If we say tomorrow we want to develop smart cities, maybe, and I really think that we should consider all issues, but for me as an engineer, there are standards, there are norms, there are recommendations which the appropriate scientists have to develop, and me as a technological engineer should follow.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Buchner?
I would start with the same point. You say 5G will come. I doubt whether it will come in this way, because you explained very nicely the three different regions which we have to cross. And for the last bit, for the short distances, we should not use the high frequencies, but it's much better to use light, visible light communication, Wi-Fi, because the data rate is larger, much larger, and health problems are not there, data protection is easier. So I really think that's the solution for the future. We will come there anyway because we need the higher data rates. So why not doing it now? That was my first comment. And the second comment is, you said the question about health problems are not treated anonymously. I think it is, from scientific point of view, it is. But it is a written policy of some parts of industry that you should disseminate doubt on the scientific result. You should say that results are not unique, that there is discussion. If you look, for example, at the question of cancer, it's clear. You have lots, not only two, you have lots of experimental findings which show that without any reasonable counterexample. You know the biological, biochemical mechanisms, you know everything. So why disseminating doubts where the scientific situation is clear? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buchner. Do we have any responses to those points, particularly in this, on the very relevant notion of disseminating doubts? I mean, there is a certain trigger-happy reaction, I suppose, from some in the industry that these health concerns aren't valid, but is this simply industry trying to push its technology on people without taking into account the potential health ramifications in the future? Perhaps Paul, yeah?
Je pense que aussi bien la Commission européenne que l'ensemble des gouvernements sont avant tout à l'écoute des intérêts des industries plus que des populations. Et dans ce cas-ci, on nous harcèle qu'on ne peut pas échapper à la 5G parce qu'il y a une question de compétition internationale. On doit aussi envoyer des satellites par milliers dans la basse atmosphère. Si je suis bien le propos des ingénieurs, il y a pour le moment des constellations de satellites qui sont envisagées par SpaceX, 42 000 satellites qui vont être envoyés dans la basse atmosphère. OneWeb, 5260, voilà le tableau qui est là, il est à la disposition de tous. Facebook va en envoyer des milliers, Amazon la même chose, sans parler des Chinois et des Russes qui évidemment vont suivre puisqu'il y a la compétition internationale. Est-ce que l'Europe s'engage dans cette voie aussi? Je signale que tous ces satellites vont créer des débris ingérables dans la basse atmosphère et qu'en outre, ils auront, dans la mesure où ils vont diffuser des rayonnements 5G, dans les gammes des ondes 5G, vont avoir un impact potentiel sur l'ionosphère. C'est très difficile de négliger cet aspect qui est très important parce que l'ionosphère, c'est notre environnement électromagnétique planétaire. Et les résonances Schumann, qui ont été mises en évidence depuis les années 50 comme très régulatrices du fonctionnement du vivant sur la Terre, risquent d'être perturbées par tous ces satellites. Est-ce qu'on peut considérer que c'est un problème secondaire ou pas important? Moi, je ne crois pas. Donc, il ne s'agit pas d'être craintif ici, il s'agit d'être prudent. Et le principe de précaution ne dit rien d'autre. Il dit que quand on a suffisamment d'éléments qui montrent qu'on pourrait avoir des impacts extrêmement graves et irréversibles, eh bien, il faut plutôt renoncer qu'avancer. Et ce principe de précaution, on le met sur papier et on le célèbre, mais on ne l'applique pas. Donc moi, je suis pour l'appliquer.
Okay, thank you for that, Paul. We have one question over here, please.
Oui, bonjour, Alexandre Penel, journaliste. Monsieur Poulikov, quand vous parlez de que les gens veulent développer des smart cities, je crois qu'on est quand même au Parlement européen qui représente le peuple européen. Moi, j'ai pas envie de smart city, il y a plein de gens que je connais qui n'ont pas envie de smart city. Je constate quand même que vous êtes 6, qu'il y en a 5 qui représentent l'industrie. Quels sont vos intérêts, monsieur Poulikov, pour dire que les gens veulent des smart cities? Qui vous a payé? Qui a payé les autres? C'est quand même effarant de voir quelqu'un qui bosse pour Nokia venir nous expliquer ce que la 5G va nous apporter. Donc voilà, je pourrais vous expliquer un peu là-dessus. Et je vous vois plutôt comme un apôtre du progrès qui dit la 5G viendra, il ne manque plus qu'à mettre les mains en l'air. Mais je crois qu'on est dans une période où l'urgence climatique, sociale demande d'autres réponses. Merci.
Okay, thank you. So some valid points there raised on perhaps the desire of the citizens to pursue this type of technology in the face of these threats. Vladimir, would you like to respond to the point made about smart cities in particular?
No, I don't want to respond on this point. Okay, I just said that if I commented again, there are driving forces. If we want smart cities, we have to do it. You don't want smart cities. Okay. Now, it is, I said, I'm a telecom engineer. I'm a researcher, and I'm researching in the technological field. And I think, from my 30 years experience, I have seen 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G. So my expectations are that there will be 5G, because there are driving forces for that. How it will be implemented, in which way, we are maybe all together have to reconsider, to consider it all together.
Okay, thank you. I would just like to, if there's no other, would you like a follow-up? No? If there's no other questions here, over here at the back here, okay. So perhaps the gentleman in the white shirt, please.
Hello, my name is Dimitri Nikolov, and I would like to ask one question, Mr. Hristov. And how is your view of your members about the current investment situation? They should continue investing in 4G and start investing in 5G. And as a follow-up, how your members will ensure equal access, because with the network slicing, then we are going into a different situation when some people, some areas will not be having equal access to the internet with the equal parameters.
Okay, thank you. Who was the question addressed to, sorry?
I think it was me.
Right, that's one.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So, according to our estimates, Europe compares well with other regions in terms of 5G development, trials and commercial launches. However, our estimate is that by 2025, Europe will only have a third of the connections 5G, which will be leave Europe trailing behind some of the leading markets such as US, South Korea, Japan, and China. I mentioned earlier the challenge of the investment and the amounts needed here. And also we think that this estimate it reflects the realities of the European market today. Many of our members are still migrating customers to 4G networks, competitive pressures remain high, revenues return to negative territory over the past few quarters, and the midterm outlook for mobile operators in terms of revenue is also broadly flat. In these challenges, as I mentioned, policymakers and regulators can do a lot to reduce the cost and accelerate the deployment. On the, you also mentioned the equal access or regulation. We had a debate over the past few years on open internet or net neutrality. There are updates on these issues, and in the BEREC, and the regulators are following that debate. I believe that those are in place, and we'll provide safeguards in this respect. Maybe when it comes to safeguards, as I had the opportunity to comment, I wanted to maybe respond to some of the earlier questions, saying that we also believe that technology can help tackle the world's biggest challenges, including climate, including I also wearing this pin, the Sustainable Development Goals, the challenges the world faces, and we work a lot to try and find a way how technology can help on these. The mobile industry was the first to commit to these objectives and SDGs, and I know we are running out of time, but we have a few cases happy to share, and also publish on the GSMA website case for change, how the technology can help with these issues. And on the health aspect, we would really recommend to follow a scientific approach. The mentioned international committee, ICNIRP, is an independent one. The members of ICNIRP are not employers of the industry, and they are financed by national and public organizations. They work together with the World Health Organization. The standards are recommended by the Commission, and we encourage all governments to set the safeguard limits when it comes to emission according to these independent international safeguards. These are regularly updated. We are looking forward to the next update before end of the year.
Thank you, Laszlo. We are being rushed out of the room because I believe there's another meeting in here. I think one thing is for certain, we need another event like this. We've got some closing speeches now just before we'll leave. Firstly from